Well, good afternoon or good evening whenever you are viewing this, either live or recorded. I'm Pastor Calvin Lindstrom, joined by Mr. Ed Straka, and we're happy to have with us Dr. Quentin Johnston. And we'll discuss some of his bio and work as we get into this video. Ed, I want to ask that you give a little more of an intro to our guest today.
All right. Well, Dr. Quentin Johnston serves as Vice President of Operations and Infrastructure for the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which is the only accrediting agency serving the nation's burgeoning classical Christian school movement. Dr. Johnston, having led Whitfield Academy in Kansas City, Missouri for 8 years, Quentin has a passion for classical Christian education and the development of generations of young men and women committed to living a life of Christian virtue to the glory of God. Growing up in his native Scotland, he has earned degrees from Telford College, which is part of Edinburgh University, and Whitfield College and Theological Seminary in Florida. Dr. Johnston started a successful small business in Edinburgh, where he also helped his wife found the Regis Academy. An honorably retired teaching elder in the PCA, he has served in a pastoral capacity in 5 churches, teaching and head of school roles in 5 schools, and served as academic dean of Whitfield College for 8 years. Quentin was married to Pam for 45 glorious years before she passed on to be with the Lord, and he resides currently in Orlando, Florida. So Quentin, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with everybody. Good to be with you, Ed and Calvin. Long time no see, long time friends and colleagues over the years. So it's good.
Hey, I was down in Florida in August, so I did get a chance to see you then.
Right.
So Ed, do you want to start off the grilling here?
All right. Well, Quentin, tell us a little bit about your role with the Association of Classical Christian Schools. What brought you there, and so on and so forth.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the VP of Operations and Infrastructure. That essentially means that I care for things such as teacher and administrator certification, school accreditation, diploma authorization, endorsement of curriculum and training. I also serve a kind of COO function, which is beginning to develop more in terms of just the operations of the association to do with the office, the finances, and so forth. How did I get here? Interestingly, I was the head of school of Whitfield Academy in Kansas City, Missouri for 8 years. And during that time, really got to know the association, appreciated the work of the association especially through its accreditation program that we were a part of. And so when the opportunity came to join the association in this capacity, the president knew I was free and interested, and so he contacted me to take the job. And so here I am now working from Florida, working from home, and enjoying the work very, very much.
Great. Well, let's talk about classical education. Is it here to stay, or a trend sweeping the Christian education market for the last 15, 20 years and
Sure.
fade away in another 10 or 15 years? What do you think?
I think classical education as a movement, as an idea, is here to stay. I was thinking back to really the modern iteration of what classical Christian education is. Interestingly enough, back in 1980 and 1981, 3 schools started quite independently of each other. 3 classical Christian schools started, one in Topeka, Kansas, one in Moscow, Idaho, and the other in South Bend, Indiana. All came to, in God's providence, it would seem, came to a desire to do something other than they were doing, a desire to look more critically at how we were teaching and what we were teaching. And so they started back then. So it's been around for a while. One of the seminal books of the movement, Norms and Nobility by David Hicks, was written in 1980. So it's been around for really for a long time now. The one of the other great books of the time, written 10 years later by a guy called Doug Wilson, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, um, that's was written 32 years ago. So in that time, the movement has grown. Our own association, the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which was incorporated in 1995, we now have just over 500 schools in our association, of which just under 70 of them are fully accredited schools, and there are many, many others. We we would like to represent everybody, but we don't. And our principal concern are with, in fact, we restrict our membership to Protestant schools, but there is a large and growing Roman Catholic classical school movement, as there is within the Lutheran churches, and even Greek Orthodox are getting in on the act, as it were. So I would say classical education as an idea is here. I think it will stay, given the depth of scholarship that is being applied to what we're doing, to the recovering, as Dorothy Sayers also said, the lost tools of learning, really discovering what it means to educate children in this classical manner. So, yeah, I think the movement's here pretty much to stay, God willing.
Quentin, when you have served directly in school administration, did you see families were more running from a burning down school system, or were they more intentional, not just escaping, but this is what we're wanting? We're wanting a classical Christian education.
Boy, I would say people really fell into a number of categories. You've got the families with their eldest child now ready for kindergarten. That group, they're looking generally for a Christian school. They're looking typically for all the things they think of that might be Christian. Most are not looking specifically for a classical school. So they come and they tour a number of schools and they find us. And generally speaking, we found that about 80% of the people who came for a tour enrolled their children in the school when they began to understand what it was we were doing, why we were doing it. And within 3 years, it was clear that they would never go to another school. So that was very clear in terms of how they were moving. I would say, especially since the pandemic, a lot of families around the nation have abandoned the public school system and have been looking for something else. Classical schools, along with other Christian schools, probably have grown significantly since that time. So I would say part of the challenge we have as an association, and one of the things we're working very hard to do, is to make classical Christian schooling a category in people's minds. So when they think of schooling, they think of various options. They might think of homeschooling, they might think of public schooling, they might think of parochial schools, they might think of college prep schools, they might think of your regular Christian school, and we want them also to think of classical Christian school as a category that they can think of. So we're working very hard to make that known within the Christian community for them. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but generally we find that people come to us, and unless they've already either been in a classical school and they're moving town, or they've got friends who have been involved in classical education, and even then, it's tough to say how much they really understand about the the inside workings of classical education. But what they do see is they see the product, and that's typically what encourages
Yeah.
them. So they have a neighbor, they've got friends at church, and they see their children playing and interacting with others, and they go, "Whoa, wait a minute! There's something interesting about this. We're seeing a level of maturity or thoughtfulness that would be unexpected of children of various ages." And so that's what they're encouraged, I think, by to explore classical Christian education.
And unless a parent had attended a classical Christian school or a Christian school before, they probably that they don't necessarily know all the details, and so it may look like they're just running from a system. But if in God's grace they're getting their children out of a godless system and putting them into a godly, educational thing, that's what we're happy with. And
Yeah, and in truth, I mean, I would say to people who are in public education, yeah, run from it.
yes,
Run as fast and as hard as you can away from it, and find yourself a Christian schooling for your child. And
right,
I would advocate for a classical education, but find that Christian schooling,
right,
and don't be afraid of running, and don't let that to be a pejorative statement. Yeah, absolutely. Run away and educate your children in a godly fashion.
What would you say is from your vantage point some of the fruit that you have witnessed in your educational career, seeing some of the reformation of our very fallen academic system and just our society in general?
What I see with the kids who are in classical education, I think they are learning to think Christianly. That's what we really want them to do. We want them to grow up loving what is right, ordering their affections, their loves in a proper way, working with diligence, with fortitude to promote love and kindness and truth and justice and all of these things that we want to see. I think as you begin to see students develop these virtues in their life, then I think there is hope going forward as they take that right thinking, that virtuous Christian testimony and life and commitment into whatever sphere of influence they're going to have, whether it's in home or not. The movement has been around long enough now to see some quite startling, quite significant results from our graduates. We were part of a large study a number of years ago that was done by, I think, Notre Dame, and they used classical Christian schools, in fact, ACCS graduates, as a group, and compared them with kids in homeschooling, kids in regular Christian schools, in public schools, and in private, just private non-Christian
Like
schools.
secular school.
Secular schools. And what we saw was that the emphasis that we had hoped to see was there. We had significantly higher proportions of students who were still walking with the Lord, who were had Christian views in terms of marriage and society and all of these kind of things, who were pursuing their life's work as a calling, whatever that might be. And so what we saw from that study is called the Good Soil. We published, it's called the Good Soil Report. What we saw there was what we were hoping to see, that the form of education that we are offering, training children to, as I say, order their affections in terms of, and pursue truth, goodness, and beauty, to pursue virtue within the context, obviously, of the Christian faith, comes out with students who are actually more likely than other cohorts in other school systems to produce the outcomes we're looking for. It's not certain, it's not 100%, sadly, but it's very encouraging, at least at this point.
Amen. That's I find the fruit is the long term fruit. Not that we're not looking
Right.
for anything in the short term, but indeed it is that long term, Lord willing, multi generational fruit that really
Right.
is what we keep in mind.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough in my school in Kansas City to have two families, both of whom had sent their children to Whitfield Academy, actually, and who had graduated from the school, gone on to university, now had children of their own, sending their children to the academy, walking with the Lord, and delighting in Him. So that's like super encouraging when you see that.
Without a
Yeah,
doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
that's true. And a thing, having taught at a variety of schools, from ordinary Christian schools, well, with you in the past, Quentin, almost 30 years ago, at a Christian military school, and then at well, actually three different classical schools, one in Texas for 8 years, one in the Pacific Northwest, a day school, but equally an online classical Christian school, Kepler Education. I did that during the year of the pandemic, and just the type of curriculum and the literature and history that is read, and the questions that all of those various writers from the ancient Greco-Roman world, the medieval world, which of course is 1,200 years long. Most people seem to be locked in knights in white satin in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, and that's it. But it's a 1,200-year period, and of course, modernism. Um, Students are forced to interact with that, and they learn to speak more carefully, write more carefully, and have to think their way around corners more than your average textbook education. And it really does make a difference. By the time their senior year comes around and they have their senior thesis, both written and their speech, whether you're a school that requires 5 minutes or 15 or 20, either way, they're doing things that are going to serve them well in the world, just in terms of practical
Yeah.
application, being able to sell yourself in an interview, being able to write a memo to coworkers, and so on and so forth, as well as speak publicly. So I'm definitely sold on it, and we certainly need something to look forward to. Off the top of your head, you're around my age and so forth. How do you see the state of modern American society today, Dr. Johnston?
Wow. Um, you know,
We got 5 hours, so I'm just kidding.
yeah. Um, I think primarily what I see is a loss of faith. It is from that, I think, that all the other ills stem.
Yeah.
Where a nation loses its collective faith, it is unlikely to survive. In fact,
Wow.
a friend of mine, a historian Otto Scott, once told me that from his studies, that no civilization has ever survived the loss of its collective faith, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are. I think the loss of the Christian faith and the verities that stem from it utterly undermines everything else. And so we go from standing on a firm foundation to standing in quicksand. And so I think that's where we are. And absent a reformation, which I think theologically I believe in, I think we will continue down this path until God in His grace rescues us from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's movements like this that'll be, Lord willing, God's providence useful in rebuilding out of the rubble. Well, let me ask you this, Quentin. Having been born a Scotsman in what we might call the former British Empire, and watched the demise culturally, one of the greatest culturally Christian empires known to man. What advice would you give us Americans regarding our own empire, both domestically and abroad? And I say that because similar to ancient Rome, we have our legions all over the world that meddle, for better or worse, in the affairs of other countries, and at the cost of the American tax. What advice do
Yeah,
you have for us?
I think the only advice I can give would be to echo the words of Matthew 22, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's basically what I would say to our society, that the loss of these two commandments are just so central. But the other thing I would say, I don't want to sound trite when I say that, but the other thing I would say to folks who are concerned about our society is to take a historical view, take a long view. The world has known upwards of 20 great empires,
Yeah.
um, from from earliest time. Um, six of them have lasted, at least six of them I can think of, have lasted more than 500 years. We've only
Yeah.
been around a couple of hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
The British Empire that you mentioned, at its peak in the 20th century, it was the largest empire the world has ever known in terms of landmass.
Mm-hmm.
It lasted 350 years. You can probably, depending where you want to say it ended, 1930s, certainly by 1949. Um, so we have to take a long view and say, God in his providence and his wisdom will raise up civilizations, and the rest of them will go to the dust. Um, Here we are, all these years later, all of these great empires are simply footnotes in history. Who knows what the next 1,000, 2,000 years will bring? Maybe the Lord will come back. I don't know. I have,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I tend to take a long view in these things. But if there's another 1,000 years before the coming of Christ, well, boy, what can happen?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So my encouragement for folks is when they look at our nation and when they see the problems with it, and of course we should be working hard to defend what is good and what is right, to preserve truth, goodness, and beauty, if you will, to stand for righteousness, to confront sin wherever we find it. We ought to be careful that we don't deify any nation or culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can mourn the loss of Christendom for sure. But like the British Empire before it, the United States is not by definition the best that God can do.
Mm-hmm.
And my prayer is that the next 1,000 years will bring us just a wonderful resurgence of the faith. I think classical Christian education is one way that will happen. I think Christian education per se is going to be that. Classical Christian education, I think, has got a big part of it. In fact, I remember I was talking to some folks when I was in an active in ministry in the PCA, and somebody was asking me, when I was involved in education, when was I going to get back into ministry? And I said, no, I'm not. It's not back into it. This is the ministry. In fact, the reason why I'm involved in education is because I see a long view. I see I want to raise up generations beyond my generation and even the generation that I'm teaching, but multiple generations. This is a wonderful enterprise that we're involved in, that has like the preaching of the gospel. But I mean, this is sending arrows into the future that will bring glory to God for the future. So I see that when we think about where we are right now, Uh, I don't lose hope. I know God is on the throne. Um, I know that there is that if we take a long perspective, then we're likely to not be despondent. But we have to expect decay. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. There is the nature of man is um, that God raises up and He puts down,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
He raises up nations. I knowing that you're going to ask me this question, incidentally, I was reminded um, of a poem by Percy Shelley. So if you don't mind me reading it, you probably know this.
Please.
But back in the 1817, the British Museum acquired a statue. It was a head and torso, a fragment of a statue of Ramses II. It dated from about the 13th century BC. His Greek name was Ozymandias. And Shelley hadn't actually seen the statue, but he wrote a poem. In fact, he was in competition with another poet to come up with the poem. I think Shelley won, and he wrote these words. He said, "I met a traveler from an antique land, who said, 'Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert.' And on the pedestal these words appear: 'My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.'" And I
Yep.
think that I think about that poem a lot when I think about a perspective of history. Maybe one day America
Mhm.
will, the civilization that we so much love and enjoy, might simply be a forgotten statue somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But God is not mocked.
Mm-hmm.
God's purposes remain. God is moving forward. And,
Mm-hmm.
the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
what we believe and we hope and pray for. And that, I think, is why I'm involved in classical Christian education, why I know you guys are involved in
Mm-hmm.
education, is to see that glory of God
Mm-hmm.
come about. So Ed, it's a kind of long way of saying I'm not despairing.
Mm-hmm.
I get annoyed,
Mm-hmm.
and I grieve, but
Mm-hmm.
I know God is on the throne, and what we are doing in terms. And I encourage those who perhaps are listening or watching. If you are educating your children, think beyond a career, think beyond a salary, think beyond a good paying job or all of these things, and think in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the investment you are making in the life of your children, perhaps even in your grandchildren, as you
Mm-hmm.
help fund their education. Uh, you are literally sending a letter into the future,
Mm-hmm.
uh, testifying to God's goodness and grace. And
Mm-hmm.
who knows what will happen through the education that they receive, and your prayers and your provision.
That is. I think that's a
Amen.
beautiful, beautiful summary. Any last words, gentlemen?
Now, we'll let Dr. Johnston have the last word, as it should
Well,
be.
I don't know. I think that's kind of it. I mean, it's. I mean, I think that's why we do what we do, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's exactly right. That's why we get out of bed in
it's
the morning.
Yep.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I can say anything more. I don't want to say anything more. I think that's the that's the nub of it all.
Well, listeners, thank you for watching. If you've made it to this point, you have persevered, and find out more about the Association of Christian Classical Schools. Correct? Did I say that right? Did I get the right
Classical
C's in
Christian
order?
schools, but
Classical
we'll
Christian Schools. Yeah, sorry. Association of Classical Christian Schools, ACCS. I do know that, and
yeah, just go to
the
classicalchristian.org and you'll find out all about us.
excellent classicalchristian.org.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Quentin, for joining us. Ed, we'll be in touch, Lord willing. Bye bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye now.